My name is Jocelyn Gifford. I'm the president of the Sidney Community Association. Welcome everybody. I want to acknowledge the presence of Councillor Cam McLennan from Sidney and Councillor Peter Wainwright from Sidney, Councillor Jeff Orr from North Saanich. Thank you to Sidney All Care who donate this space and their equipment for our meetings. Because of wide interest in today's topic, we wanted to video and make it available on our website. Michael Doyle has kindly volunteered to do this. He'll be focusing on the panelists, but it's possible he may capture some broader shots during the discussion. If you have any concern about this, please let you know. We can make sure that you're not included. Our topic for today is municipal election, electing our town council. Although voting day isn't until October 20th, now's the time when potential candidates are deciding whether to run and planning their campaigns. Mayor Price has already put up his Re-elect Steve Price website, and we know that there will be more from other candidates. The Sidney Community Association believes that voters who understand the process and get involved are in a better position to elect candidates who share their value and vision for Sidney. The Community Association's policy on our role in the municipal election is on our website on the links page. We're guided by visions in our Constitution. So we want to provide a nonpartisan forum for dialogue and information sharing, to promote informed public interest and a high level of participation, to advance the interests of the community as a whole, and to promote constructive dialogue, respectful communication, and responsible reporting. SCA is nonpartisan and will strive to treat every candidate equally and fairly. They all deserve our respect for their commitment and their service to our community. However, we encourage members and residents to choose candidates to support and to help with their campaigns. We may be volunteering with different candidates, but let's disagree when we do with respect for each other. Today we have a terrific panel. I will very briefly introduce each one before they speak for about 7 minutes each. Then we have a question and answer period and discussion. So, moving right along, I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, Mona Brash. Mona has lived on the Saanich Peninsula since 1986. She has seen local politics in all 3 municipalities. The focus of her master's program was local government and politics. She has taught political science at UVic, Camosun College, and on the Esquimalt Naval Base. She's just finished teaching a course in local politics and government to 35 students at Camosun who were surprised at how important local government is. So, Mona, her topic is the legal framework and rules governing local government elections.
Is that all right? Hope so. All right, thank you, Jocelyn. So first of all, in terms of the legal framework, the Constitution of Canada, which is the supreme law of Canada, states that municipalities are the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces. Therefore, provincial legislation determines the rules for local elections, and we have the Local Government Act. So I'm going to talk about key dates, candidates in terms of financing and who can run, and then about voting. So first of all, general voting day has changed this year. It's no longer November, it's now Saturday, October 20th, and we will have advance polls on the 10th and the 18th. Nomination packages for people who want to run are available online on July 27th with Sidney Municipal Hall, or you can go pick them up. Those nomination forms must be submitted by September 14th at 4 o'clock, and if you're in at 4:05, too bad, according to Sandy Nelson. Then we have to wait for her to declare who the candidates are. So until she declares, we do not know who's running. Even if they've said they're running now, that doesn't mean they are. And lots of people may be running, and you have no idea that they're going to run until she announces it. So that will be a very exciting day. To be a candidate, you have to be 18 years of age or older on voting day, a Canadian citizen, have lived in BC for at least 6 months, and you do not have to live in the municipalities in which you choose to run. There are many new financial regulations that are going to impact candidates this year. So Heather has the booklet, 91 pages just for the financial rules now. It's quite complex, but we'll try and distill it for you. Now there are limits on how much a candidate's allowed to spend during an election. And so from September 22nd till October 20th, election day, in Sydney, mayoralty candidates are allowed to spend $11,349. And that's it. Councillor candidates can spend $5,674.50 and no more. All right, so we will be watching. For comparison purposes, last election, the mayoralty candidates spent from $9,000 up to $13,300. So it's not going to be that different. Stu Young, I love this one. Stu Young, Mayor of Langford, spent $6.04 in his last campaign. Do you know why? He had to open a bank account, and he was ticked that he had to spend $6.04. All right? What's going to be very different of donation rules is that in the last election, the mayoralty candidates had business donations. And this year, no businesses are allowed to donate, and no unions can donate. What's very fun when you start digging into the weeds of these donations is that many businesses and individuals donated to multiple candidates. And the candidates wouldn't have known that until after the election when they looked to see who donated. The same with individual donations. Comparison purposes, in Victoria, they're going to get to spend $54,000 if they're a mayoralty candidate. Vancouver, $210,000 if you're a mayoralty candidate. Surrey, $195,000. So we don't spend a lot here. To donate, there are rules about who is allowed to donate. Donations can only come from individuals, no unions, no businesses. You have to be a resident of BC and a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Therefore, you do not have to be a resident of Sydney to donate. You only donate up to $1,200 per year to a candidate. In terms of voters then, the Local Government Act allows for municipalities to decide about identification, whether they require it or not. And Sydney is going to require that you have ID, so do show up with good ID, 2 pieces of ID. To vote, you have to be 18 or older on voting day, Canadian citizen, have lived in BC for 6 months prior to when you register. And here's where it's different. You have to have been a resident of the town of Sydney for at least 30 days. In terms of third-party advertising, which doesn't sound like it's going to happen, this is when somebody who's not associated with the campaign advertises for or against a candidate or an electoral organization who's running a slate. If anybody here is thinking of advertising for a candidate, you must register with Elections BC, and you may not spend more than $750 in Sydney. If you are going to advertise, you've got deep pockets and you're advertising around the whole province, you can spend $150,000. In terms of Sydney, I don't know of any groups that are going to be doing this, but I caution everybody to watch out for AstroTurf groups. These are not grassroots groups. These are ones who might spring out in the last week or two that nobody ever heard of. Make sure they've registered and that they're legal. And if they're not, you scream and yell that they're not. All right? What's different about Sydney, they are going to allow mail-in ballots that must be received by October 19th for people who are either ill, disability and injury, or have to be out of town. And I think that's my 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mona. Our next speaker is Heather Garchor. She was elected to North Saanich Council in 2014. So I should have introduced Heather as a councillor who's here. Apologies. Heather's lived in the southeast quadrant of North Saanich for 30 years, where she's been active in community building and civic affairs. Before her election, Heather served as vice president of the North Saanich Residents Association. So that's our counterpart in North Saanich. She also served as vice chair of the Parks Commission, liaison to the Friends of Dominion Brook Park, liaison to the McTavish Interchange Task Force, and community representative on the Sainsbury School Joint Task Force. She volunteers at Janice Place, combining her love of people, cooking, and her background in social work. Heather's going to talk about running an election campaign and how to get elected.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and the Sidney Community Association for the opportunity to be here. Hearing you comment on my involvement with the McTavish interchange reminds me that when I was considering running the first time, I was actually cautioned about including that information, lest it not work out favorably. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. I've run one campaign, found myself elected at the end of it, and I'm happy to share with you what I learned and what I think you might want to be thinking about if you're considering running. The most important thing is that your campaign really needs to be authentic. Everyone's going to have their own style and everyone's going to approach a campaign slightly differently, and it's really important that you be comfortable doing what you're doing. It becomes part of your life for quite a number of weeks, even months, and so just think about how you might want to approach it. As a candidate, you really have two jobs, and they're two jobs that only you can do and nobody else can help you with them. One is to meet your residents, engage with them, get to know them, and allow them the opportunity to know you, who you are, what makes you tick, why do you want to run. And the second thing is you need to know and understand what the issues are in your community. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? You don't need to have all of the answers, but you do need to have some sense of what is going on, some sense of what the community is concerned about. And as for all of the other jobs, you can get help with that, but those two things you need to take on yourself. The campaign is really a series of steps intended to raise awareness about you and your campaign, what's motivating you to run. And my first suggestion is surround yourself with a good team of people. A campaign manager can take the lead, they can be the main point of contact, they'll have a sense of your overall vision, how you see your campaign rolling out. They can take all of those phone calls, deal with the emails that you are not going to have time to deal with. A financial agent, particularly in this election, is a very, very important a document that Mona referenced earlier, 85, 90 pages, whatever it is, and it's a lot of detail, and it's a lot of detail that you as the candidate should not have to concern yourself with. You probably will have a friend or a neighbor who will volunteer to take on that role, and I suggest that you accept their offer. There are serious consequences for not abiding by the campaign financing rules. Signs are a very traditional way of getting your name out there, familiarization. There are large signs, there are lawn signs. Large signs you need to have a sense of the sign bylaw, the size of them, the height, when they can be placed, when they need to be taken down. So that's the Town of Sidney sign bylaw. And you'll also want to familiarize yourself with the Ministry of Transportation and their rules and regulations around sign placement near the highway. And that's actually something I just learned. I don't think I knew that when I was running. The lawn signs will be an ongoing task as you knock on doors, as you meet people, as you participate in all candidates meetings. People will want your signs. So that's a job that one or two of your volunteers can take on, driving signs around, placing them in yards or beside the garage for the owner to place when they're able to. And bear in mind that your lawn signs can be moved. Actually, all of the signs can be moved, but the lawn signs are much easier to move. So if you have them all deployed, and you're going to have a budget, and there'll be a maximum number of signs you're going to be able to have. If you suddenly have a whole a neighborhood that's got great visibility and you think that would be a better location for your lawn signs, there's no reason that they can't be moved. The signs belong to you, not to the property owners on who the signs sit. And it's very important to have a plan for picking up all your signs at the end of the campaign. There's nothing worse than lawn signs and the large signs hanging around after. It's quite likely that you'll have a number of friends and neighbors and community members who want to help you with your campaign, and I'd suggest that you have a volunteer coordinator who can take those names and assign them to the various tasks that come up as you get going. The volunteer coordinator can work with the sign people, the fundraising people, all of the various tasks that are required, and they can put the right person with the right job. And I would suggest that you have lots of jobs, involve everybody who wants to be involved. It's a great way to meet community members. It's a great way to learn about your community, learn about the issues. Small jobs are as important as the really big jobs. And your volunteers don't have to live in your community. It can be your sister from Vancouver, your friend from Houston, your mom from Edmonton. So whoever wants to help can come in. Door knocking is a really important part of the job, and in Sidney it's considerably easier than in North Saanich, I must tell you. That's where you are face to face with your residents. Not everybody's going to be home, not everybody's going to answer the door, not everybody will want to talk to you. 99.9% of the people will be pleased to see you, of the ones who are home. And it's a great opportunity for you to chat with them, tell them why you're running, what's motivated you to be there, hear from them about what their issues are, what their concerns are, what they're looking for in a candidate. Yeah, just find out what the issues are. They might be neighborhood specific, they might be town specific, but it's very important for you to be there, and that's one of the important aspects of your role. What we have done in North Saanich, typically, I did for my campaign and several that I helped on, we often have somebody who's like a walking coordinator, and they have mapped out the municipality. They've got maps with routes of various lengths. So all you have to do is pick up a map. The volunteer coordinator assigns you a volunteer to accompany you. You've got a starting point, an end point, you know where to park. It's going to take 2 hours and you're done. It's a very efficient way to target your community, and you may consider doing that in Sydney if you're either helping somebody or wanting to campaign yourself. It's important that you make the very best use of the limited time that you have. A mail out or a flyer of some kind, that's an important role for someone. This is the bulk mail of Canada Post. The flyers need to be bundled. They need to be bundled in certain quantities. There are routes that overlap with Sidney and North Saanich, and so you may not want to pay to deliver flyers to North Saanich, for example, when you have limited funds, but perhaps those routes could be hand delivered. So understanding how bulk mail works and the timeline is very, very important. So that's a great job for someone. Small group events or coffee party coordinator, I'm calling it. There are lots of events that you'll be invited to. A group of neighbors wants to have a wine and cheese and meet either yourself or a group of candidates, maybe a morning coffee party. And those really are great bang for your buck. It's just a couple of hours of your time. You meet 10 or 15 residents. Hear what concerns them. They get to know you. They leave that place and they tell another 10 or 20 people, and so the multiplier effect kicks in. And so you can have somebody who kind of takes care of making those arrangements for you. Communication, apart from the signs, is something to really give consideration to. Social media is a big one, and with these new campaign financing expenses, it's a good one because it's quite good value. Things like Facebook and Twitter. If you have a website, you want to think about that. The challenge, I think, with websites is they need to be updated continually. If they're static and there's no change once you've been there once, it's not necessarily all that effective. So that's why my preference is the others. Paper ads, you want to plan those early. In my experience, the ad space is bought up quite early. You can coordinate with other candidates. You want to be clear or careful of whether you're a slate or not a slate, and sometimes you can be seen as a slate if you're all sharing the same ads, but it's something to consider and a way to save money. Flyer or leaflet that you leave at the door, and good old-fashioned email. That's a great way to connect with the people that you know, is something that can be forwarded easily. All candidates meetings. There are very likely a couple to be held. You'll need time to prepare for them, think about the kinds of questions you'll be asked, and you do not want to miss those opportunities. Whatever you do not miss an all candidates meeting. Media opportunities, I'm calling this next section, and that's things like Shaw Cable inviting you to record a message from yourself. It'll be Times Colonist and News Review, questionnaires and interviews. It might be an interview on CFAX. Local organizations, every local organization will send you an email with a list of questions, and they want your position on something. So you'll be inundated with that stuff, I guarantee it. But it is an opportunity for you to tell your story. And you, again, don't need to have all of the answers for everything, but you do need to allow time to respond. And just bear in mind that no response is a response, and that is often noted. So my suggestion is that you respond to every request in some way or another. So it's hard work. Yourself, be prepared. Have a plan. Start early. Now is not too early to think about organizing yourself if you're planning to run, and have a good time. Like you can have a lot of fun. You meet a lot of wonderful people in the process, and be looking ahead to election night on October 20th and plan a celebration, because whether you are successful or not, it's worthy of a celebration. Anybody who steps up to do this work should have a party on election night. Thank you.
So there's the work plan. Thank you very much, Heather. That's explanation of the elements and the hard work involved and the fun. The next speaker is Patrick Killeen, Chair of the Election Committee for Sidney Community Association. His work experience is with BC Tel, also as Operations Manager of West Shore Terminals. He's worked as a general contractor for 18 years and now is a real estate agent for about the same length of time. He has run political campaigns at municipal, provincial, and federal levels, and his topic is how each of us can help the candidates of our choice. Patrick.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Needless to say, this is an incredibly important election coming up. It just cannot be understated. What happens on the 20th of this year is going to affect this community for a damn long time. And this is a great community. One of the objectives of the SCA is to encourage voters to examine the facts of the town of Sidney, to review the positions of the various candidates, to make sure that when you walk up to the voting booth, you have an informed decision on what candidates best represent your vision for Sidney. Now, I want to make 2 points on being prepared and change. And as you can see, I've got quite a bit of gray hair, so these will go back a few years, but I think most of you will recognize them. I was born in Vancouver around 1953, I know it's going back a long way, when the Granville Street Bridge was under construction. If you stood on Burrard and looked west, you would not have seen one residential high-rise. There wasn't one. All of those buildings, and I don't know how many there is, but there's hundreds, have been built since then. A dramatic change. The city of Richmond, a flat floodplain without a great deal of appeal, in 1960 had a population of 40,000 people. By 2017, that population had grown to 225,000. That's a 550% increase. Obviously, it changed that community dramatically. My point is, the pressure of change is knocking on our door. So let's think about the peninsula a little bit. The peninsula is an absolutely unique and incredibly attractive area. You would search a long way to find the diversity we have. Farmland, forested areas, small mountains, waterfront lakes, streams, loads of parks and walking trails, and sprinkled throughout this beauty, we have an international airport, the second busiest ferry terminal in British Columbia, a ferry to the US, one across the Saanich Inlet, an impressive growing high-tech industry, a federal plant research center, a huge recreational boating center, and all of this surrounded by world-class recreational and commercial waterways. Can you say desirable? You bet it's desirable. And I'm not so sure that we've been discovered yet. So desirable, our entire community needs to be a part of this. The next major fork in the road is the October 20th municipal election. That's where you will get a chance to make a difference. So what can you do? Number one, plan to vote. Follow the letters to the editor at the PNR. Go to all candidates' meetings. Join the SCA and get online information. If you see a candidate that reflects your views, offer to work on their campaign. Campaigns are fun, and you'll meet loads of new people. So talk to your friends, share your ideas, and become part of the future of this very special place. And I encourage you, when you leave today, pick up a brochure on the way out, pick up 2, one for yourself and one for a friend. And if we all sort of start handing something out to a friend, discussing with a friend, pretty soon the crowd's going to get larger and we're going to get more people better informed and better equipped to make a good decision come October 20th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Something I left out of when I was introducing Heather, she particularly wanted to make a point that she is willing to speak with you individually. Certainly, we will have question and answer, but if you want to get in touch with her and ask questions, she's open to that. Our final speaker is Clarence Bolt. Clarence was a councillor in Central Saanich from 1990 to 93. He was chair of planning and zoning. He's been a member of many teams organizing municipal election campaigns. He's been chair and still is chair of the Board of Variance in Sydney, but has also done that in Central Saanich and North Saanich. He is a historian focusing on BC history and particularly Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations. He's the co-chair of the Sydney North Saanich RCMP Community Consultative Committee. His topic is, once elected, what's it like to be a municipal councillor? What's the role? What's your responsibility? And how much power do you have? Clarence.
Just one correction. I'm not the chair of Board of Variance in Sydney. My topic is about what happens once you get elected to council. And I can recall my first council meeting. There were 7 of us sitting around the table and thinking, my goodness, I have power, and we have power. And we have 3 years to make decisions that can define our community's future. And then I thought a bit more, it's not 7 of us, but it's only 4 of us have that power, if it works in certain ways. In other words, a majority of council, it only takes 4, it doesn't take 7. And then there was something else I realized very quickly. The mayor has no more power than I do. Of course, council's power is not unlimited. As Mona said, local government power is defined by provincial legislation. The province is the boss of municipalities and local government. But municipalities have one key area of power, and that's land use. And with their control over land use, they can shape how a community will look, its character, its feel, its mood, and so forth. In other words, council's real power is land use. But again, council has 2 limitations. They're required to follow rules that the province has defined. The first rule is official community plans. And official community plans set out in a general way what vision there is for the community and the goals for land use. There's a second set of rules, and that's zoning bylaws. And zoning bylaws are bylaws that make very specific what the OCP says in general. And the specifics are about how every piece of land in Sydney can be used. In other words, the type of buildings, the heights, the size, the setbacks, the density, the activities that are allowed on them or not allowed on them, and so forth. So, no land use decision by council can be made without reference to the OCP and the zoning bylaw. In other words, you can't violate them. Now, however, there's always a however here. I learned also while I was on council, despite what I just said about the rules that council must follow, legally they have to follow the OCP and zoning bylaws, but they can also do whatever they want, really. And how is that possible? It's possible not by ignoring the OCP, not by ignoring zoning bylaw, but simply by amending them. And they can amend them at will. Or they can pass variances to the zoning bylaw. That's a whole other discussion. There was a second realization, and that is that amending OCP and zoning bylaws require public input. They require public hearings. But councils don't have to pay attention to what the public says. They can ignore them entirely. Not only can they ignore them, but they don't even have to give reasons for their decisions. In fact, they don't have to say anything at all. And that makes things sometimes very disappointing for residents. So what I want to do just for the last minute or so is talk about my reaction to that experience of being on council, but also to the experience of watching councils. And I think there are a number of things that communities deserve from a council. And the first thing, and I think perhaps if you were to say one thing, what communities deserve from council is respect. Or most residents know very little about the rules which govern councils. They know very little about how decisions are made. I think most residents also want to feel comfortable in their communities. They want to feel secure about where they live. We don't like surprises. And therefore, I think if you want to run for council, this is my suggestion for how you can be a good councillor. And there is a two-way street involved here that I think residents have a responsibility to. But I'm talking from the perspective of council. I think councils have to educate their residents. And councils have a responsibility to make residents aware of how OCP, official community plans, and zoning bylaws work. Why we have stores, schools, family residences, condos, industries, parks, etc., where they are. Why are they where they are and not somewhere else? Secondly, council is responsible to make sure that residents understand procedures and bylaws so that people know how they can be involved. Third, I think council should hold town hall meetings. I think they should hold workshops, open houses, and formats can vary, where people can meet and talk to each other. I think there are times where councils are very reluctant to have people actually meet each other and discuss commonalities. There's a divide and conquer approach that I've noticed in the last couple decades especially. Open houses don't facilitate communication very easily. Fourth, developers should be required to consult neighborhoods about proposals. We can all learn from each other. Developers can learn from us and we can learn from developers. And fifth, because councillors don't all speak on the same page on all issues, I think they should openly discuss and debate their positions. In other words, we should know differences of opinions from council. They represent the community. There are differences of opinions in the community. That will be reflected on council. In other words, I think we should be aware of why there are those differences and how they resolve those differences, the discussion that councillors have, so residents can understand how decisions are made and why they're made. In short, end up with this, there are three things that I think communities are best served with: when residents are respected, secondly, when residents are empowered to be knowledgeable, in other words, they're educated through council but also through themselves, and thirdly, I think what's important is communication between residents and council. So respect, knowledge, and communication. Those are my three. Thank you.
There's a set of guidelines for a new council. So open to questions and discussion.
What will be the reporting date for candidates' expenses?
I didn't bring that date with me, but it's quite soon afterwards, and you can just go to, probably Sidney will have it on, but Elections BC has all the financial statements of all the candidates online, and you can look and see, but it won't be till after the election.
I was just wondering, the fact that the council, four of them, can have the big sway of making all the decisions without the consultation of the people, if they choose to ignore it, can never be changed. Is that just the way it's going to be forever for the municipal governments, or they control the land and that's it?
The day that you can change things is once every 4 years in October. Unfortunately.
Mona, you talked about contributions from individuals and you mentioned a figure. I don't know if that's, I can't remember, it was $1,400 or whatever it was.
$1,200.
So can you give $1,200 to 4 candidates?
Yes.
Or okay, so you give some to the mayor and to anyone you wanted. So the maximum is per candidate and not per individual?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you look at the disclosures from the last election, people donated to multiple mayoral candidates to cover their bases, and to multiple candidates as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
A question for everybody, basically. As voters, we want to have as much confidence in the candidates that we're going to vote for, and unfortunately we're often disappointed after we elect people to find out that their values weren't what we thought they were, or all kinds of stuff that surprises us. So what advice would you give to us as voters to try to pin that down as well as we can before Election Day?
My suggestion is that you do your very best to get to know the candidates that are out there. So if you're interested in what's going on in your community and you're concerned about who's running and you want to get to know them, host a coffee party, host a wine and cheese, some kind of an event to bring people in where you can get to know them in more than the 5 minutes you might have with them on the doorstep. And that can be informal conversations with the folks that are there. There can be specific questions, really getting to know the candidate. I mean, really most people, leopards don't change their spots, that kind of a thing. So probably a little investigation and you'll soon figure out who the folk, and ask around. That these are small communities that we live in.
Google them right away.
Talk to people who are notables, people who have influence, people who you respect in the community. Look at their financial statements from the past and see who's linked to who in the community. Read your review, not just ads, but just find out who's hanging out with who. There are lots of ways to find out, but talk to your neighbors, talk to other people, and look at their voting record. See what they've been doing on council in the past if they're running again, if they're an incumbent.
I'd like to respond to that one also. As those of you who've been members for a while know, we've been sending out reports for 2.5, 3 years about not only voting, but what people said as the reasons for their votes on and how they perceived different issues. This is the people who are sitting on our council now. So asking the Community Association and looking back at those kinds of reports is another way of identifying the consistency of perspective. Now, you need to do all the other things for people who don't have experience on council in the last 2 years.
Excuse me, I would agree with everything that's been said before. And I also add this, that every candidate will put out brochures, and brochures have a way of all sounding the same. Everybody's democratic, open, transparent, for change, positive change, and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes pamphlets don't help much, but I think really look at them carefully, because sometimes you will find things that distinguish them. But the real thing is we do live in a small community. And the one thing that I discovered when I was on council is that you do have a visibility. People know who you are, even if you don't know who they are. And people know each other, and there are networks. So get to know the candidates, get to know, as the others have said, how they're connected, who they're connected with, and so forth. Communities are small, and word travels fairly quickly. Positive and negative. But yeah.
Another question before we roll out the iron line?
Collingwood. It was fitting that you began with a reference to Jane Jacobs, because of course she believed in community and altruism. And I think that's one of the characteristics of local government especially. You either believe in altruism and the belief in the community and pulling for the community as a whole, or you're very individualistic and you believe in self-gain. So I think what we have to try and understand is determine which of these men and women run for council are truly altruistic or have certainly many of the characteristics of altruism and the community, and what constitutes the community good, and clearly those people who are driven by primarily self-interest. Now, I'm not suggesting we should all be saints. We're all driven a bit by self-interest. It's what makes us what we are. But trying to determine those things, I think, is a key thing. It's unfortunate in the structure of government. We've had a very good outline of the nature of local government, how it's meant to function. There's no proper recall mechanism. When we have a council or particular individuals that deviate substantially from what we conceive as a community good, we should be able to recall them. I realise that this might be time consuming, but that's the nature of democracy. People get in the way in democracy. They don't roll over and do exactly what a few people wish they want them done from their own self-interest. It's been very perplexing living in Sydney for the last few years that I have. I've lived in Greater Victoria for almost 50 years. It's been perplexing to see some of the behaviour of council at times. I'm sure most other people have felt that way too, hence their motivation for coming here and taking part in this very good attempt to understand where the direction of our community should go. Thank you for bearing with me.
I'm looking around the room, and I think it's fair to say most of us are a particular age group, which leads me to my question is, how do we engage younger folks in getting interested in the elections?
There's a vicious cycle with young voters. First of all, if people do not campaign and address the issues that younger people have, young adults have, the young people do not vote because the politicians don't care for them. And then because the young people don't vote, the politicians don't care about them. And someone has to break the cycle. So the candidates can start by breaking the cycle and finding out what young people want. And we can encourage young candidates. Recently there was a little comment in the review that bothered me a lot about someone talking about the, what's a dangerous trend? Something like that about young people who are looking at entering politics. It's a wonderful thing, and we do have some young people who are interested, so we should support them. What they need is different, but they still matter, they still live here. So pay attention to them first. Take the first step. They're busy, they're young, they don't know everything that we know.
Thank you. Part of the challenge, I think, is the workload. It's a fair amount of work, it's a lot of reading. We have a structure in place. If you look at a community, you see that they meet every Monday night at 7, and in-camera meetings are Monday at 2, and commission meetings are at 2 in the afternoon, whatever the arrangement is of your community. But that is not set in stone, and that can be changed. So if you've got somebody who's interested in running in your community, but they can't make a meeting on Monday at 2 o'clock, there's no reason that meeting has to continue Monday at 2. It could be Monday at 5, it could be Tuesday at 6 or 7. So just kind of thinking outside the box, how to meet the needs of those folks. Things like childcare get in the way. It's not an easy fix. It's a fair amount of work, which is probably one of the key reasons. And today, in most situations, you have two parents that are both working already.
Certainly, younger candidates would make quite a difference, and hopefully we'll see that this year with 2 or 3 way younger than we are.
I want to speak from another hat that I wear. I'm on Sidney North Sandwich RCMP Community Consultative Committee, and I am impressed with initiatives that the RCMP is taking to reach out to the community, speaking to school students, speaking to seniors groups, speaking to community associations, and so forth. I think council has to take more initiative, and city staff, or however you want to define it, in terms of meeting with people, meeting with groups, and educating people. Students should know what a councillor is and what a councillor does, and how their lives are impacted by land use decisions, because land use decisions affect them. They're out on the streets, or not out on the streets. Why are they out, or why are they not out? Certainly, most of us had childhoods that are very different from childhoods now for a whole host of reasons. But what are their interests? What are their concerns? I think it's really easy, and I can speak from experience, that when you're on council, a kind of Stockholm syndrome sets in, and you're 7 people and you meet regularly, and the concerns around the table are the concerns of the community. And you know what? Very quickly you're out of touch with what the community really is about. And I think this has to be a constant moving back and forth of dialogue. That was one of my points. And particularly with different groups and the people that aren't generally taking the time, or let me rephrase that, particularly with groups of people who aren't really traditionally involved. We're all involved. We go to council meetings, we get an interest in our community, but there are people who aren't. How do you reach those people? And I think the only way to do that is by making the effort. I think councils have that responsibility, whether themselves or at least creating initiatives that do that.
Ready for a short break? You want to stand up and stretch, and then we'll come back in 5-10 minutes, warm up your coffee or tea, and talk about voter turnout.
And have a bit of a conversation about voter turnout. Fewer than half of eligible voters in Sidney voted last time in the municipal election. 43% of us voted. Now that's still 10% better than the provincial average, but it's still less than half of us. And I looked on the Elections BC website. In the provincial election in 2017, our riding, Saanich North and the Islands, had 74% voting, which again was much higher than the provincial average of 61. So why do fewer of us vote at the local level? And what can we do to change that? Diana?
Yes, I'm Diana Goff. I live on 5th Street. Now, I'm an older person. I'm 77, and the moment somebody says, "Oh, it's just online," I think, "Oh, I just put my washing on the line." And this doesn't mean anything to me. And if I want to vote for somebody, I need to see them and listen to them. I need to go to an open house. So please, I know that will bring the young people in if you push on the computer, but not the older people. Thank you for letting me share.
Quick question, do campaign contributions get counted? Is it the September date, or is if we're making contribution now? That's one question. The other part to it, how are contributions in kind valued? That's the other side of it. And a quick comment, and then I'll listen. In deference to, yes, you're absolutely right, Diana, you know, but it was asked, how do you get to know candidates? Following them on Twitter and Facebook is very interesting, and see what other people tweet and retweet about them. It's already started in some places that people are retweeting stories about candidates with an interesting comment. See whether those stories are intended to make the candidate personally look good. That's a very nice bit of evaluation as to whether they are altruistic or in fact self-centered. Donald Trump would love that, you know.
Do you guys want to respond to that?
What we've been able to determine, given it's 91 pages long and new, there are a few areas that are kind of gray, but what we've been able to determine is that $1,200 is what you can donate per candidate per year. All right. The election period begins on January 1st of this year, and candidates are going to have to declare things when they do their financial statements then. So, but what's different is the campaign period, which defines how much they're allowed to spend. So there's a time frame in which you can donate, there's a time frame in which things must be recorded, and then you have that very small window for which you can spend money according to Elections BC. Have fun reading the 91 pages.
And somebody asked the question earlier during the coffee break about in-kind donations. And that's kind of complicated. So if you have somebody who's volunteering on your campaign who's, as an example, is a communications expert, and they normally are paid for that kind of work, and they work on your campaign, that's not volunteer time. They're not considered a volunteer. That's considered an in-kind donation. So the value of the work that they would normally be paid for has to be attributed and accounted for. I'm not an expert on this book by any means. I'm not even all the way through it. It's complicated, and that's why I suggest you get a campaign manager who can pay careful attention to the details.
Address the question you raised when we came back into the room this afternoon, and how do you get people involved and more active? And it's a tremendous struggle. I mean, my experience, I got involved in municipal politics when a building was being proposed up the street from where I lived, and it wasn't NIMBYism, but it was what did it put in there and why. And the first meeting I went to, it was like a deer in headlights, because I was there for the final readings, and you know, they had an open house, a discussion, and then I thought, well, we're going to sit back and talk about it, and we're going to come back a week later, we'll reflect over things. Later in the meeting, the thing passed to the motion. So how do you understand that? Well, going to council meetings, and I've been going on a regular basis for the last 4 years. So that I've got a very good idea of how the various councillors have voted their actions, so I feel quite confident in where I would go. But most people don't do that. So they get involved when they're upset, they get involved when something rocks the calm world they're living in, and they don't understand the complexity of government. And I don't know how you're ever going to get around that. But one way we could do it in terms of getting people at least better informed would be, hopefully there'll be a series of candidates, open houses, meetings. I would encourage, I think it was Heather talked about hosting events in your community, maybe a street party, or maybe, you know, if you live in a condo, some condos don't allow campaigning. And just bring your neighbors in, and hopefully they'll be better informed about what are the issues on the table, what's at stake, because it's amazing. This is the most important level of government for most people. I mean, the province, we always think about the provincial government, we think about the federal government. Our day-to-day lives are affected significantly by what happens. whether it's where the sidewalk goes, what trees are cut down, what's built, what decisions are making, financing public buildings, that towns take on board. So I don't know what the answer is, but maybe this kind of piecemeal approach to sort of building a greater awareness and talking to your neighbors, and you maybe some suggestions. And for those of us who have access to the website, there are going to be all sorts of websites out there. They're going to be, and be informed. And there are people here today. I was hoping for more. It's a start, and see where we go. For council, it's the same, 10 or 20 people that show up every week. And that's basically it. And the Community Association has done a phenomenal job over the past couple of years in informing citizens. So for those of you who haven't been on the website looking at what they do, it's just amazing. So that's maybe a real asset this year as we move forward and providing factual information and maybe asking questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to look at Sidney voter turnout historically, because I think we had a couple of elections ago where there was absolutely no interest in local government, and council was elected, wasn't even elected, it was just appointed, because there were only 5 candidates running. And then there was a 12% turnout, and last time was 54. So 43, which is very low. But if we take the trend from the provincial government election, that was very high for our riding. So maybe there's a political force that would encourage people to come out if we could capture that. And I think, unfortunately, just like that gentleman said, people are responding to events that happen in the community and all positive from their perspective. And I think that will bring people out. And it's hard for people to understand the full spectrum of what local government do, but if they're interested in one issue, that will probably bring them out.
Just a couple of comments about increasing voter turnout. One is offering to arrange rides for those who might not have access to transportation or have mobility challenges. Think about the folks in your community who might need a ride to the polls either on voting day or the advance polls. And with the advance polls, it's important to remember that you can vote in an advance poll even if you're going to be here on general election day. I think in years gone by, advance polls were intended for you if you were at work or vacationing or what have you, but anybody can vote in the advance polls, and so that's another opportunity. Sydney has a mail-in ballot, I think Mona said. We also do in North Saanich, and that's another one. If you know people who are going to be away, or you're going to be away yourself, make sure you get that information out to the people in your community. Arrange for it. I think in North Saanich, our ballots are available October the 1st, and I think they have to be back by 4 p.m. The day before in order to be counted. So that's another way for people who are going to be away. And the other thing I was going to comment on was about campaigning in condo buildings, and that's quite correct. You can't get into these buildings, but there are ways around it. What you need to do is have a connection in the building, encourage them to have all the neighbors in for coffee, use the common room, if they don't have a common room, use their own unit to have an event, and they invite all the neighbors, and that's a good way to get in.
I'm going to come from a little bit of a negative perspective, because we live in a time in which a lot of people are very cynical about politics and don't show up to vote. And voter suppression is something that you've probably heard it before. And there are candidates who really create a tone that turns people off even more, so people just don't bother showing up. And so how you run a campaign and how you respect the community, I think, is really important in terms of getting people interested. And I think if the tone goes really bad, I think people should also rise up and say, wait a minute, we don't like this in our community, and really rally people around that. We've certainly seen evidence of that happen, and Mona and I have heard of a candidate in the Greater Victoria area who deliberately wanted voter suppression and negativity and not many people turn out as a way in which this candidate could ensure that he or she would have his or her base turn out to vote, and the other people would be so turned off they wouldn't show up.
It's true. It was a mayoral candidate in Greater Victoria who said that to my class when asked how would you increase voter turnout. That person said, "Who said we want to?" So the students never forgot that one. I think people don't realize how much power they have with the vote in municipal elections with such a small voter turnout. It takes very few people to win. In Greater Victoria last time, Lisa Helps beat Dean Fortin, the incumbent, by only 89 votes. He never dreamed it was going to be that close and could easily have gotten more voters out. Here in our last election, there was only a 68 vote difference between the last person who got on council and the next highest voter. So it doesn't take a lot to gather up your friends and neighbors or some organization you belong to and say, just show up. You could actually change the results quite dramatically with a small number of people. Here's a fun, just a couple fun stats for you. Highest voter turnout, Bowen Island, 95.13%. All right? Pardon? Issue. No, they have a high voter turnout. Greenwood, 70, Zabalas, 87%, Stewart, 83%. One thing they have in common, they are small places where people know each other. All right? Langford did very well last year, 19%. Stu Young spent $6.04 and was re-elected again and again and again. Right?
I think it's important to, when you're talking about getting younger voters, the definition of younger differs for a lot of people in this room. I'm young. For me, it's true for me, it's 20 and 30-year-olds, but I think people in my demographic, even a little bit younger than me, are a lot of people that don't vote as well. And I know a lot of people, friends that don't vote. I didn't get involved in municipal politics till a couple of 3 years ago, much like Benny did. Just read about something going on in the community, came to a meeting and ended up going to the fireball going, wow, what's going on, all these people. And it was a real eye-opener, and it got me more involved in what was going on in my community. But up until that point, like many people, a wife, 2 children, I didn't have time. I mean, it's just a time thing. I'm taking one kid to karate, one kid to baseball, I'm coaching, I'm working, I've got to spend 5 minutes with my wife just to keep my marriage okay. And you're trying to fit everything in. So I think, as a person looking back, I think we need to let them know that you actually care about them and take the time to get to know them and knock on the door and talk to them, because nobody ever did that for me, so why would I even pay attention? And I think that's kind of what's missing. There's a disconnect between our councillors and people in our community, and especially the younger and a little bit younger than me age category. We tend to only approach the seniors because they're the people that vote in Sydney. It's the truth. If you want more people to vote, you have to make the effort to get involved with them and understand what their concerns are. And they're very different. Each demographic has a different concern, but they all want their community to function well, and that's one thing they have binding them in unity. And I just think that going forward, that approach and what you mentioned, respect people in your community, respect the people that come up to council meetings. There has to be a level of respect at every level of government, and especially municipally, because we are a small community. So I think that's important. Thanks.
I haven't researched this myself, but I have heard from people who have that people are more likely to vote if they feel that they have something positive to vote for and if their vote is going to make a difference. So that's something, I guess, for our candidates to bear in mind. But I think for every one of us, find out whether you know somebody who didn't vote last time, and see if you can make a deal with them or make a date with them or whatever, to just, each one of us could influence 3 or 5 people, and that would be how many more people voting. So I think we need to, we can change the atmosphere, the environment in Sydney, and develop a sense of mission, of urgency, and of importance in terms of learning about candidates and voting for our council. We may have time for 1 or 2 more questions, if there is one. Are there a couple more questions?
Yes. One and then yours. It was Hassel. Okay,
I've got a question that really probably should be directed to the provincial government, but I've been a taxpayer in other cities, and one of the things that on a municipal level, the voters were had to be within the boundaries of the community, but those that were running for office also had to be within the boundaries of the community. Since moving here to BC, I find it very strange that anybody that lives anywhere can run anywhere they want. And I can see this on a provincial or a federal vote where you're wanting to run a candidate on a party basis, but on a municipal level, I see it as insulting, because what I've noticed in the 14 years I've been here is that a lot of the non-members of the community that get in vote for things that can affect the operation of that community. And I think I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they all seem to have the same opinion. Why the heck is BC different from other places?
I have a very simple question. Over the last 10 days or so, we have been running an ad at the Star Cinema. I'm just wondering, have any of you seen it? One? That's interesting. We are planning to run an ad called the pre-show ad at the Star Cinema from now right through to Election Day. Basically, it's just advertising this organization. But one more comment on expanding, growing the group. That's extremely important. If each one of you took a brochure and talked to a person and said, hey, I'd like you to have a look at the Sidney Community Association. I'd like you to, what they're saying is get involved in your community, and let's go to the election really well informed. It's very powerful to ask people to do something. If you wait for somebody to volunteer, you'll wait a long time. But ask them. People will respond to being asked. If everybody here just did one person, that would mean that the next meeting we'd have 100 people instead of 50. And that would be quite a difference. So pick up a brochure on your way out, and we need all your help to get this community to really come together and get it working and well and into the future. And I think we have a very bright future, but be involved. Thank you.
For the gentleman who mentioned the fact that people can run for office and not live in the municipality, if it matters a lot to you, then again, this is the time when you say that to people around you and make it very clear that you find this a problem and you don't have to vote for them. And look at the nomination papers when they come in, when the candidates are declared. See what their address is. There have been rare candidates who don't live here and have done an excellent job in Sidney. And then we have Mr. Shabib, I'll say his name, he's run in every municipality, and the Union of BC Municipalities has tried to bring forth a resolution, tried to have the provincial government change the law so that you do have to live in a municipality, but they did not make that change in their last revision to the Elections Act. So that's where it stands.
I want to thank our panel. I think they have been so gracious and so informative. We have a little token gift for each of them from Janet's Teas on Beacon Street in Sidney. You can pass that down to Clarence, Heather, and as the panelists may be still, that's for Michael, still, oh, I've got one for Patrick, sorry, I do have. Since he's a board member, I debated, but he's done a great job with the other panelists. I am thinking that they're probably willing to talk a bit after this. But we also have the Jane's Walk, those of us who want to go and look at connecting through green spaces in Sydney. The nice things about Jane's Walks, I think in Sydney we tend to focus on the waterfront and Beacon Street, and Jane's Walks can take you in the neighborhoods that don't sort of get onto the glossy photographs, but are very important to where people live and to families using trails and parks and so on. So please join me in giving another round of applause to our wonderful panel this afternoon. And I do have a little gift for Michael for videotaping, so we'll have a look at the results. Thanks very much. And hopefully announce that they're on our website if you want to look at it again or tell your friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn.